So let's now talk about simple configurations. Using configuration, you can create variations of a single part file. For example, here we have a simple switchboard with 5 slots for our switches. Now consider a situation where we want to use the same part for different number of switches. Maybe we want a configuration for 3 switches and then maybe another one for 7 switches. And maybe in some configurations we want fillet and in some we don't want fillet, or maybe these wire slots. So you can build configuration for all of these different iterations of this same part. And that's what we are going to explore now. Now to make configuration, you need to go to this configuration manager. And by default, it will show you only one configuration. That's the default one. You can create as many as you want in this list. So here I'll just select this default configuration and I'll use Control C and Control V. That's going to simply copy this configuration and paste it. So that's copy of default. Now I'll just double click to activate this. And as you can see, the green tick mark will show the active configuration. Now I'll slowly double click and this will let me rename it. So let's just call it 5 switches. All right. And then we have this default. So let's just make it 7 switches. All right. And we can make one more configuration for, let's say, 3 switches. Now for that, instead of making simply a new configuration by Control C, Control V, you can right click here and select Add Configuration. Now this will let you add a new configuration. So here I'm just going to select a new name, that is 3 switches. All right. And with that, I'll click OK. And as you can see, we now have another configuration with 3 switches name. So currently all these configurations are exactly the same and changing it won't affect your drawing. But now I'll start with 5 switches, which is the default configuration now, and I'll go back to the feature tree. Now before making some changes here, we need to activate the dimensions here, which is currently not visible. So I'm going to go to this annotations folder, right click, and I'll select show feature dimension. And that's going to show all the dimensions that we have applied on this feature. So here, as you can see, it is quite cluttered. So I'm just going to move these dimensions out so that it's clearly visible. So here are all the dimensions that we've added so far. All right, let's move it out. Well, this one too. And then we have this here. Okay. And we have this 5 here and then this one. And I think that's sufficient for now. All right, so now we have moved all of these dimensions. Let's see what else we can do. So currently all these dimensions are unnamed. Actually, they are named, but the names are not showing up here. So I'll just add the name as well. So I'll go to this view option and I'll activate the name of these dimension using this option, view dimension name. Now the name of dimension like D1, D4, D3, D2 will show up, which we are going to change. We'll make it more descriptive. Now the first distance here of 30 unit, which is D3, is the distance from this edge to the center of this hole. And that's the exact distance between all the other holes as well. So this is 30, the center distance from this point to this is 30, and so on. So everywhere it is 30. So I'll just double click this distance and I'll give it a new name. So I'll just click here, it's D3. Let's call it hole gap and click OK. Now it has been renamed. Now this 5 is actually the number of holes that we have. So let's make it descriptive too. So I'll double click and I'm going to call this one number of holes and click OK. Now it's descriptive too. Let's just move it out. And we have 180, which is the full length of the switchboard. So let's change this too. So I'll change that. I'll call it switchboard length or just board length. All right, and that's changed too. Now we don't need to use all the other dimensions and we don't need to rename them all. This is more than sufficient for our requirement. Now to apply the configurations, you need to first change a few parameters here. Now in this case, we want to change number of holes, but simply by changing number of holes, we won't be able to change the size of this board, because if we decrease the number of holes, that's going to leave, well, room here, and we want to keep the gap between all of these switches well consistent even when the number of holes changes. So what we want is a flexible board which changes in size when number of hole changes. So we need to change this board length, and we want to do it in such a way that changing this will change this automatically, and we can do it using formulas. So let me show you how it works. So I'll double click here, and here it's just showing the normal dimension of 180 mm. But instead of using this 180 mm dimension, I'll use two parameters to define this. The first parameter is hole gap and second is number of holes. So let's just delete this dimension entirely, and instead let's start with a formula. So I'll just type equal for the formula, and then I'm just going to select this dimension. So just click on this hole gap, and now it is selecting this dimension here. Now hole gap multiplied by number of hole is equal to, well, all these between gaps. So hole gap multiplied by this asterisk sign, click on this number of holes. All right, and that's also added. So here hole gap is 30, number of hole is 5. So 30 times 5 is 150, which is all these gaps except this last one. So 30, 30, 30, 30, and 30. So 5 times, that's up to the center of this one. But we also have this last remaining gap that we should add. So to add it, I'll simply close it inside a parenthesis, this entire formula. So right after this equal function, I'm going to add this parenthesis start and parenthesis closes, and then I'm going to add plus sign, and I'll add hole gap again. So hole gap times number of hole plus hole gap again. Now this formula will be equal to the board length. Let's click OK, and here we are. So nothing changed here apparently, and that's a good sign because the formula actually sums up to 180 unit, and that's what we want. So with that, we are now ready to add the configuration. So this is just the preparation part for making your drawing ready for the configuration.